Welcome everybody to the Little Athletics New South Wales Sunday Coaching School. My name is Darren Wenzer. I'm the Head of Coach and Volunteer Development at Little Athletics New South Wales. It is absolutely wonderful to have Brett Green with us today. Now, Brett is a level 5 throws coach and a level 3 middle and long distance coach who's been coaching for more than 35 years. And now during this time, he's coached athletes to Commonwealth Youth, World Junior, World Youth and Commonwealth Games. He is currently the head of Helensvale State High Track and Field Academy, whose alumni includes World and Olympic 100-metre hurdles champion Sally Pearson and Commonwealth Games marathon champion Michael Shelley. Now, Brett is also the Papua New Guinea head coach for throws, the Queensland team coach for throws, and the Queensland Target Talent Program throws coordinator. Welcome, Brett. It's great to have you with us.
Fantastic to be here, Darren, and welcome to everybody who's joined us tonight too. It's great to see coaches on.
Yeah, and look, a really interesting bio you've got there, Brett, and there's a couple of things that really stood out. The Papua New Guinea head coach for throws, how did that come about, and what does that involve?
It's actually head coach, not just head coach throws, so it's actually coordinating the whole team. Basically, it came about from working with Debono Paraka for the Commonwealth Games in 2018. So Debono joined me on the coast here for 6 months in the lead up to the Commonwealth Games. And the result we got from that was that he made it into the final, finished in 10th place in the final. And that was the best result that Papua New Guinea had at the Games. And yeah, good PB there. And from there, it developed into visiting PNG for a coaching camp up in Goroka. And which was a great experience, I guess, to see the different conditions and what people have to work with, and then joining them. I was invited there from that on to join them for the Oceania Championships last year in Townsville. We had a 2-week training camp then in Cairns, following on from that, and then a week in Samoa with the Pacific Games, which is basically, I guess, all the Australia and New Zealand are invited, but it's mainly the Pacific Island nations, and it's sort of more their Commonwealth Games, I guess, where they're highly competitive against each other.
Sounds absolutely fascinating, Brett. So will that involve, once we get over the current environment, will that involve more trips to Papua New Guinea, would you say?
Yes, I was actually, I should have been up there roughly now. I was supposed to have gone up in June as well, and then also January again, which was when I was up there the last time. And really, the main thing is not so much, you fly in and fly out and coach people. It's a lot of times they can go back to their old habits and stuff like that. So that's not necessarily beneficial, but spending some time up there with coaches and really trying to develop coaches. And it's a tough environment. They do have some facilities. There's a track in Port Moresby, and there's a few other tracks, Kimbay, and a few other areas as well. And then there's some grass tracks as well. Sometimes the weather has a big impact up there on top of that. But really trying to develop some coaches. But you got coaches that actually will walk to their training sessions, and they walk 2 hours each way to get to training and coach. Out of their village and over to the track and then home afterwards. So it's a big commitment on their behalf. And you've got to also, I guess it's a challenge as a coach to work around that from a training perspective. So, and one of the things I just did recently, obviously with the whole COVID thing, is that we do have a number of athletes on placement with universities in US. And most of them ended up coming home, obviously because of COVID. So they were back in PNG without really coaches and lots of stuff. So I spent a fair bit of time doing some programs for them. A number of them have actually headed off just the past week now back over to a couple of the unis. And I'm still working with a few, obviously just putting programs together and reviewing footage and those sort of things as well. And not just in throws area, but in other areas as well.
Okay. And we heard two very well-known Australian track and field names there who've been through your Helensvale State High Track and Field Academy. Sally Pearson, two-time world champion and 2012 Olympic champion in the 100-metre hurdles, and Michael Shelley, two-time Commonwealth Games marathon champion in 2014 and 2018. And what do you remember about them as developing athletes, Brett?
Well, I'll start with Sally first because I met her first. So I met Sal as a 9-year-old turning 10, and that was through Helensvale Little Athletics, which had just started up in our school grounds at that stage. And Sal was there for the very first training session that we had. So I guess, one of those things, memories there is just I did comment to her mother just about the balance that she had, even just during one of the warm-ups. And Sal had come from a gymnastics background, so she had a lot of those sort of skills. And people always ask questions about, did you see the talent in those days and that sort of thing. But I'm not a firm believer of the word talent, really. We use it, but I think there's a lot of better words, and I can extrapolate on that a bit later, probably. But then Michael came through into grade 8 and started, and he was an absolute nothing in grade 8, little skinny thing, and still is a skinny thing. He's just a bit older. But the big thing with him was that he actually wanted to be a rugby league halfback. His idol was Alan Langer, but he just wanted to run basically, and he did nothing at our school cross country in grade 8. Grade 9, he finished 5th, but by the end of that year, or by the middle of that year, then he'd gone on and made it to state titles and finished 13th. So, and then in grade 10, he started winning medals at state titles and stuff like that. But I guess the one key there is that both of those people could go out, they could train unsupervised, absolutely smash themselves, be vomiting over the fence, and it's what you do when other people aren't watching that counts. If you have to have people watching you to do well and be good, because you want to show people, then I don't know whether you're really going to be successful. It's the ones that can really train and work hard when there isn't a crowd there, that I think are the really successful ones.
Okay, and winding things back a bit, Brett, your background, whereabouts did you grow up, and what was your early involvement in sport?
I went to Aspley East State School and Aspley High School in Brisbane, and a bit of interesting thing is, how did I end up in athletics? Because I actually came through and was a swimmer, so I went to a few state titles for swimming. I played the real football, so the round ball game, and also cricket. So they were my 3 sports. But I think probably they gave me a good general grounding in skills. Plus, I'd play any sport that was available as well. But I did a little bit of athletics at school, but it was more, I guess, the events that other people didn't do, because I was a bit of a person where you just help out the school and do whatever needed to be done to go and go to the district carnival. So I threw a bit of discus and a little bit of shot, but I didn't really do a lot of work to that. But I was pretty strong and fit from my swimming in particular, and I'd go quite well in the school cross country because I was aerobically fit from the swimming. Wasn't much of a sprinter, but I didn't really have a hell of a lot of a background there. But since then, and obviously as I coached, I learnt the throws through the coaching and started having a go myself, but I've never really competed at any sort of level from that perspective.
And how did coaching in athletics start for you, Brett?
I ended up in a coal mining town called Middlemount out in central Queensland, sort of inland from Rockhampton. And really it was just being able to provide some of the school children with opportunities. There was a lot of sporting facilities in town. It was actually a very good town in that sense. But it was just giving students at school the opportunity to do something at lunchtime or after school. And really it was just whatever they wanted to do. I sort of started to learn how to coach. And it was obviously a lot harder in those days where you didn't have the access to the internet. And so I'm talking like mid 80s here because I am reasonably old these days. And yeah, you had to track down, like film, not even videos, just about. And you also had to try and track down books, of which they were few and far between. Otherwise, it was try and contact people, so you had to try to develop a bit of a network as well.
And with this 35 years of coaching, Brett, what highlights, achievements, can you name any?
Every, I guess sometimes, obviously having, national champions and athletes that win medals at, say, World Juniors or something like that, that can be a highlight, I guess, from a results perspective. But some of the things I really value, I've worked with a number of athletes with a disability. I've had cerebral palsy. I've had an athlete who was totally blind. I'm currently working with a Down syndrome athlete. I've had short stature. I've had brain injury. Yeah, they're the ones I can think off the top of my head. And I think the challenge, and then seeing just the pleasure, I guess, that those sort of people or any of my athletes get out of, having a PB after doing the hard work. I think that can be just as enjoyable as an athlete winning a medal at a championship. So sometimes I think we focus on results at the top end. But I've got a little girl that I'm coaching at the moment, an 11-year-old, who's I'm into second generation athletes these days. So I coached mum and taught mum. And she arrived at training yesterday afternoon with this big grin on her face, and I knew that she'd done a PB. And anyway, I said, "Oh, looks like you got some good news for me," sort of thing, and just the smile on her face was really good. So, it's those sort of things can be great.
I can hear some of your philosophies coming into the conversation already. I mean, what are the things that you really believe in when it comes to coaching? Brett, what type of things do you anchor your coaching into?
Look, I mean, I guess the thing with teaching is I have an argument with some people some days because they focus on curriculum in teaching. And my focus is on turning out decent human beings that actually can contribute to society. And not every kid is academic. So the big thing for me is that I want them to explore. I want them to find what they're good at, and I want them to do it to the best of their ability. And it's the same with coaching, where I want them to explore, and it's not all about me necessarily telling them how. Sometimes I think some of the best coaching can actually be to, get them started and let them feel their way a little bit, and develop a few things. And sure, you give them some guidance from a technical aspect, but sometimes I think it's really good that they do have that exploration and find their way to learn the best. And as I said, just direct them. And sometimes it'll be that they might think that they're going to be a great javelin thrower, but you can see, you don't stop them from throwing a javelin, and you can't pigeonhole an 8-year-old and say you're going to be a discus thrower. But you can guide them, I think, in what you're seeing, and that comes from having an experienced eye, I guess, as well as to what you're looking at and that sort of thing. So it's really providing that guidance where they can, allowing them to achieve what they should be able to achieve and what they physically have been given, and use it well.
Okay. Now, Brett, we've got the people joining us live tonight, and they were able to put in some questions when they registered for this particular session. So I might go to some of those now.
Yeah.
There's a little bit of interest about the basic fundamentals of throwing. And I suppose if we can group all the throws together, but do you have any, when it comes to coaching throws, do you have any like non-negotiables when it comes to, I suppose, technique or anything like that? Are there some common fundamentals that you really hammer with the athletes?
Yeah, look, there's a few things. I'll cover them in a moment. I guess the first thing is I come at it definitely from a a technical aspect where I think that you want to try and develop a good, solid technique early on. And by that, I mean that, good basics. And I think if people see my athletes compete, they'll know they're my athletes by the way they compete. So one of those things, well, I mean, all four throws they're basically the same. They've got the same principles. They've got the same movement patterns. And even from the perspective, if you talk about, you don't even have to worry about talking about right-handed and left-handed too much, because realistically, you've got one leg that produces power and you've got one leg that is your stability. And so if you can get that concept across to your athletes and they use those legs correctly, you're going to be well along the way to getting them to produce a decent throw. So that's one important thing. The other thing is basically things like left around right and right around left. So what needs to be turning around what? So if we can get some good stability and we can learn how we generate the forces, and then we learn that we've basically got to set up an axis of some sort and we've got to rotate part of the body around another part of the body and get those concepts together. They're the sort of things. Now, if we're talking, 5 and 6 year olds, just keep it as simple as possible and try and get them to really get the basics. And the basics for them, I mean, if we take discus for an example, obviously we're not going to try and get them to get the discus out wide and sweep it around them. We're just going to do a front on throw and let them swing it by their hip. But the thing is that you're teaching them how to get the discus off their hand correctly. So if you're going to modify an event for a younger kid, don't modify it so that it doesn't even replicate what the event looks like. You've got to modify it so that it actually replicates whatever the movement pattern is that you're trying to achieve. That's a really key part. And I see people do modifications that don't represent anything to do with the throw, and then you spend 6 months teaching the kid that, and then they can actually achieve that. And then I'm going to now say, all right, well, we're going to forget about what we've just done for the last 6 months, and now we're going to do it this way. So you really need to make sure you get your progressions together well, and have them clear in your own head. As the athletes get a little bit older as well, one of the big things I really enforce with my athletes is feel. So, questions rather than just saying what you see, questions like, what did you feel, or how did that feel? So that you get them to the point when they are, I guess intelligent 11 and 12 year olds are quite capable of it. But them being able to come and tell you, so in a competition, all of my athletes will be able to come to the fence and tell me what they felt in their throw, whether it was good or whether it was bad. They'll come over, they'll tell me. If they can't tell me, I can't give them feedback on how to fix it because they don't know what went wrong. So that's a really big thing for me as well, is to try and develop that from an early stage in their throwing career.
Now, Brett, what about those? Someone asked in prior to the session, what about that child who comes to you with? You can see they've got a bit of potential. They might come to you maybe as an older, or a teenager or whatever, and they've missed those fundamentals. How do you treat that? How do you work with that athlete?
Yeah, look, you've got to be careful with that, because we're all coaches. We're all at varying levels of knowledge. And I guess the one thing is anybody who's going to put their hand up to coach. I mean, my father didn't know necessarily a hell of a lot about sport, but he put his hand up to coach. Anyone who's going to put their hand up to coach, I congratulate, because it's a tough gig, and you don't necessarily have the background or the knowledge initially. So it may be someone at little A's that's done exactly that, a parent that's put their hand up and is helping as much as they can, and they're just copying whatever they've seen. So I guess the rule number one is don't just go, oh, look, you're doing it all wrong. Because number one, it kills off that athlete, it knocks them down. Plus, the word goes back to whoever was working with them, oh, you were doing it all wrong. So we've got to be really careful with the starting point there. And so you're looking at modifying now. When they come to you, the big thing that you're going to find is that when you start working with them, they're probably going to go backwards for a while, and you need to have that conversation with them and their parents that this is going to take a little while. We're going to really break this back down and just work on a few key points here that aren't quite working for you. And once we get that together, we're going to really see some improvement. And then this will allow us to actually accelerate our development from where we are. So communication is really the key, and also being careful not to, I guess, offhandedly sledge someone when you're not really trying to do that anyway. But just, the message it's a bit like Chinese whispers, I guess. The message can change very quickly from where it was delivered to where it gets to.
Okay, and there are a couple of people were very keen on your thoughts, Brett, on how you do progress someone past a standing throw. And I know we're dealing with a number of different throws here. And also I'd be interested in the way you approach that. I know some coaches will teach a solid standing throw. That has to be right before they move to a rotation or whatever it is. And some coaches coach almost right from the start altogether. They're introducing rotations and movements. Where do you stand, and how do you progress kids past that basic standing throw?
Yeah, it's a little bit different in some of the throws. So I know there was no interest in hammer there, but just to give you an idea, I had a 13-year-old girl who did her first competition the other night, and she threw off 4 turns and threw 32 meters in her first competition. Because in hammer, I just get them turning straight away, whereas a lot of other people will do standing throws. So I guess it depends a little bit on philosophy in that sense. Now, with the other throws, javelin, I don't think there'd be too many javelin coaches that would actually really do what would constitute a standing throw. I think that we would all be looking to try and get some sort of connection with a little bit of movement and the throw. One of the things I do with javelin is I do a lot of work around throwing balls, and also a lot of work on the running mechanics, and then work to bring that all together. So, but one of the big faults I see in young children in javelin is that they run too far in a run up. So, and it's easy to see because if their say throw off 3 or 5 steps is not solid, and they can't block reasonably well, you're going to see them run up really fast and slow down to throw, which is obviously the opposite to what we want. So from a javelin perspective, I would be looking at trying to really develop all the running mechanics and throw them off a short run up as quickly as possible. But most of my volume with javelin, I would be doing with balls, and also with with a group of kids. Balls is obviously way safer as well than javelin. So, that's something to consider there as well. Discus and shot put, I think, lend themselves a lot to developing a really good, solid standing technique. And you don't get a massive improvement from standing to movement in distance. So therefore, if you can develop a really good standing technique, you are going to ground them and set them up for a good throw. Discus, initially, I want them to get the feel of rotating. So when we get them, I get them rotating relatively early, without competing from that necessarily. And I don't really worry too much about it from a technical aspect initially. I just want to get them to feel what it's like to turn through. So if you come from a South African, just do 2 turns of 180 degrees. So I'm going to turn 180 degrees on my left foot and 180 degrees on my right foot, and try and get some sort of stable position and throw. And where it goes, it goes. So that's my initial thoughts on just getting discus going before I get too technical on a whole heap of drills there, and then break it down into various drills, and they've all got different names. So, but yeah, and then throwing with different things as well. I've got a whole heap of 10-pin bowling pins, and they're about 1.35 kilos. So they're a bit heavy for some of the younger kids, but if you can bore out the middle a little bit and reduce the weight as well, something that the kid can hang on to, that's not going to slip out of their hand. Like a discus can be great as well, because you can get them to turn and stop. You can get them to turn and focus on the turn rather than the thing that's going to fall out of their hand. So modifying implements and stuff like that can be great as well in the discus. In the shot put, there's obviously various movement patterns. It can just be a simple 3-step movement across the circle or on the ground. We can shot puts for the basic movements, like our little 3-step shuffles, whether it's sideways or backwards or whatever. They're fairly simple because you don't leave the ground in any way. So you can go through a lot of different drills there, whether it be just stepping in, whether it be moving across the circle. And I guess the big thing there is we've got to get some movement where the lower body goes, once we start from the back fully facing backwards, we've got to get some movement where we get the feet and the hips obviously to start getting across the circle and turning side on, but the upper body doesn't follow it until we're ready to throw. So it's more about, I guess, those movement concepts than the real specifics of the movement as well.
Okay. Now, we've actually had a couple of quite specific questions, and I might pop those to you now, if that's okay. Now, someone asked, and this may be with beginners, I suppose, or novice type athletes, that shot that falls away from the neck.
Yep.
Brett, have you got any tips for coaches, how you can either coach that to athletes, or if they've got that problem of the shot falling away, how we can keep it in there?
It's a difficult one because the athlete wants to feel, I guess, what I'd call safe and comfortable. Now, 2 things I work on. One is that if you, I'll just put my hand up here. Most kids will want to hold it like a ball. If you can get them to work where they bring their fingers in closer together so they're not actually holding it, and bring their thumb in a little bit as well. 2 things are going to happen. One is we're going to get everything pushing from behind the ball. And the other thing is that instead of holding it against their neck, they're actually going to need to use their hand and their neck to wedge it between. And if I now move my hand away, the ball falls out. So therefore, it comes down to how they actually grip the shot. The other thing is that even if they're not gripping it correctly, if they hold it and they just drop their elbow down, it's going to tend to want to drop away as well. If you get the athlete to try and push straight in, the elbow is going to rise, and therefore you're going to have force going in towards the neck, which is going to wedge it in there. So the first thing I talk about is try and push it into your neck, and the second thing is I really work on trying to get that grip of the shot correct right from the start.
Oh, there's some fantastic tips there. I've got a couple more questions from people. Now, I do at this stage just invite, if anybody does want to put a question into the chat box, but people who have joined us live, feel free to do so, and we'll try to get to it. But if you've got anything you'd like to ask Brett, or if you'd like anything to extend on anything that he said, feel free to use that chat box. Another question about kids struggling to grip implements, and one that I often see is discus. Brett, do you have any thoughts on that, gripping the discus? I often get the parents telling me, or even kids telling me, oh, the discus is too big for my child's hand or my hand. How would you respond to that?
2 things. One is we only have to throw the correct weight in competition, not in training. So if you've got a kid that's just progressed on a 1 kilo and they got small hands and they were quite okay with the 750, but the 1 kilo is too big, just keep training on a 750. Let the kid grow. And then just do a little bit of work on the kilo so that when they come to competition, obviously they're used to the kilo, but keep them confident with what they're throwing. So keep them on the lighter weight or on the smaller discus, until they can actually really handle the heavier one. And yeah, as I said, they can, they just got the heavier one in competition. And then, as I said, for the really young kids, get them front on and get them just swinging it by their hips. So, up to the back and then just through and up past up to the front so that it spins off the finger correctly, and then it's not going to fall out of the hand. And then as they gradually develop the technique of that, they can work on just bringing the hand up around the side a little bit more. And then eventually we want to, you know, if you keep the arm moving, we've got the forces working, it's going to push the discus into the fingers. So once again, it's one of those things where you've got to sort of teach them a little bit about the science behind that and why it's going to work. You know, get a bucket of water and swing it up over your head and notice that the water doesn't fall out and things like that, so they can get an idea from the science perspective, I guess. So yeah, little things like that where they do develop the understanding of it. So modify it, however, and as I said, if it comes down to throwing a lot of weight or whatever, all of my, you know, any of my hammer throwers, particularly in the girls, I start them on a 2 kilo hammer, and just get them throwing the thing a long way, and even later I bring them back onto lighter weights. And I've had I had one of the guys, 6'6" and 115 kilos, and I had him back throwing a 1 kilo discus at one stage because I wanted him to feel what it was like to get the thing moving and throw it a long way. You're not going to throw a 2 kilo discus 60 meters if you can't throw a 1 kilo a hell of a long way. So don't be afraid to change it up and try different things.
There's a couple of questions have come through the chat box, and on grips actually,
Yep.
Brett. Now I know you talked a little bit about the shot grip before, what you thought a good shot grip was. A discus grip, a little bit more on that. What do you think about that?
Discus grip, rubber discus is a fantastic for teaching the grip, because what I do is I actually draw a line straight down the midline of the discus, so you divide it into 2 equal halves, and then I always tell the kids to take the nose picking finger and slide it straight down the line, because they all know which one that one is. And so just slide it straight down that line until you just get it hooked over the edge. And then just basically, to keep it simple to the kids, just spread the other fingers equally behind that so that it's around the back of the discus. And then I sit the thumb on top of the discus in the other half by itself. So when they look at that grip, they should have most of their hand in the back half of the discus. What that then means is that they're going to really be pushing from behind the discus, and it'll allow it to spin better off the index finger. If they, and then talk to them about, where did you feel that on your finger? So if they feel it mainly on the index finger and a little bit off the inside of the middle finger, their grip's correct. If they're feeling it mainly off the middle finger and virtually nothing off the index finger, then generally what's happening is they're actually releasing their index finger because it's too far forward, and they're getting most of it coming off the middle finger. So that's one of the things where you get some feedback from the athlete. Where are you feeling that? Which fingers are coming off, and all those sort of things. And then, of course, you've got the ones that throw it out of the back of their hand, in which case you've got to bring them back to flipping it in the air or rolling it on the ground and try and get that, and then not get them necessarily throwing it too hard, just try and get it to flick it out and feel it coming off the correct finger for a while. So, and you'll generally correct that fairly quickly, but you need to correct it also nice and early so that it doesn't continue. So I hope that helps with the discus grip. That's the easiest way I find to teach it, particularly for young kids.
Yeah, and I see Kelly's put a question in there too. What are your thoughts on the crocodile grip for younger kids? Now, I assume what that means, Brett and Kelly, is that, you know, kids that just cannot grip the discus or don't think they can grip the discus, and you get them to hold it in like a crocodile mouth type position. I think that's what I'm right there, if we're on the same wavelength.
Yes, I think I expect that's what it is, which case you sort of hold it between your thumb and your forefingers.
Yes.
And I have seen that done a little bit. Very good. Thank you, Kelly. So I think a couple of things there. One is I don't have a big problem with it, I guess, in that anything that gets them to get the correct slinging action is quite good, but I wouldn't want to have them doing it for too long. But I prefer where they simply stand middle of the circle, and then as they swing the discus back behind, so they have the discus straight down beside their thigh with the correct grip. And then as they swing the discus back, they take a step onto their left leg or their opposite leg to their throwing arm, and simply come from up behind their body straight down past their hip and finish with the hand nice and high at the front and let it spin off the index finger. So they should then develop a good mechanic of getting it off the hand correctly. They're getting the motion of the arm. It's just not extended out off the shoulder. It's just coming through by their hip. They get a fairly good result. They can throw it a fairly long way doing that if they really get the angle correct. So I would prefer doing that, But I mean, if you want to introduce them with the crocodile grip initially, and the other thing is, if they generate too much force with the crocodile grip, they're also going to lose it out of their hand because their fingers probably aren't strong enough to hold on to it eventually as well. So you just need to be careful with that.
Okay. Now, there's some excellent practical advice there, Brett. Some really good stuff on technique, and just a question regarding training as such. Do you have any thoughts on number of throws in a session, Brett?
Yeah, it's going to vary, obviously, age to age. So I guess the big thing, it depends on the event as well. The considerations you have to obviously take in mind for shot put and discus, wrists and fingers is what we have to protect there. And then obviously in javelin, we're talking about sort of 11s and up there, is going to be obviously then more shoulders and elbows. Now the thing with the javelin throwers is you can throw a hell of a lot more balls than you can javelins, and you're less likely to hurt yourself as well. So less javelins, more balls, and I'm not going to put a number on balls necessarily, because I know that older athletes can throw hundreds of balls in a session. So, but they don't throw many javelins. So now discus or shot put, probably in the vicinity. It depends on, I guess, what sort of throws as well and how hard, because that's going to be a thing as well. So you're probably looking at, somewhere in the younger kids, probably somewhere in the vicinity of 15 to 20 would top it out. As you mature, you're probably going to push it out towards 30 into the lower teens. And then as they get into the higher teens, they're probably going to, particularly in discus, they're probably going to push up into maybe 40 throws in a session. And some of those, early on, if you're going to just do some easy flipping the discus out and stuff like that, you're not counting those in those numbers. So it's going to be you can't really put a real specific figure on it, because it depends on the type of throws, how hard, all that sort of stuff. So that's going to sort of determine it. And it's going to be just one of those things where you got to look at your athlete as well. And as they get into their teens, if you're really working well with your athletes, they're going to be able to give you some feedback as well. I know my athletes, I give them a rough figure on how many, but if they know they're fatiguing and they're not getting out of it what they should be getting out of it, they'll stop. They'll go, "Oh, this is my last one. I'm feeling it." But they really try and put a good effort in on that last one and see if they can then finish on a really good one as well. So it comes down a little bit to that.
And so, Brett, with moving on from the technique and the training, I suppose, do you have any tips for coaches about keeping athletes in love with what they do and motivating them to continue to be involved?
Yeah, make it fun. That's sport is about, sport should be about enjoyment, and I think it's that at any level. And even if you watch some of these elite teams train, at training you always see them playing jokes on each other, and so it's deadly serious, obviously, on a field in a match or that sort of thing. But training is very much about fun. So it's important, and one of the things, I guess, we're an individual sport, and that's where a squad is really important. And I know so April into maybe mid-May, and we were sort of in our deepest part, I guess, of our lockdown, which wasn't too terrible, we could still have one-on-one sessions. So I did one-on-one once a week with each of my athletes, just to make sure that they were mentally okay. And they all commented about how they were missing everybody else. So that whole squad thing is really important, and making sure that they're all connecting with each other in the squad, because then they come to training because they want to catch up with their mates. So that's really important. And I think, my squad, so my youngest ones at the moment, and I normally haven't had much under probably 13 years, but I do have a couple of 11-year-olds at the moment. and my oldest one's 50. And then I've got, a 23-year-old who's Down syndrome, who can keep everybody entertained as well at times, which is great. But yeah, look, keep it fun. And I see so many athletes, I think they set lofty goals for themselves, which is great. But I've seen a number of athletes over the years who have said, I want to get to World Juniors. So two things can happen there is they get to World Juniors, they go away to World Juniors, they come back and they quit the sport because they've achieved their goal. So there's a good athlete that we've lost to the sport. The other one is they don't make it to World Juniors, so they quit the sport because they didn't reach their goal. Either way, we lose the athlete. So you've got to be careful around that whole goal setting thing and why they're doing the sport. And I think, keep it fun is important. So it's really good. I did see a question there from Kelly as well there, Darren, if you want me to deal with it, which is just the ratio around standing compared to rotations in training. And I guess the simplest answer to that probably come at it from two directions. One is if they're a beginning athlete, they're going to do mainly standing and not that much rotation. As they progress, the percentage of rotation is going to increase. And the second one is if you're starting to, and I'm not talking about getting into depth in periodization or anything like that, because that's a whole nother episode. But as you progress in a season and you move more towards your key competitions, you're going to move more towards what your competition pattern is going to be, which means that you're probably going to end up doing more rotations or more movement across the circle towards the main competitions of your season. So as your season progresses, you'll probably change that ratio as well. So there's no hard and fast rule, but those would be the two progressions on it for me.
Some good guidelines there. Yeah, perfect. I agree. Great answer, Kelly's. Appreciated that answer there, Brett. Now, 35 years of coaching, Brett. Do you still see yourself as a work in progress? How do you continue to learn? Do you continue to learn as develop as a coach? Do you see?
Absolutely. If you don't learn, you die. You need to learn something every single day. So I guess, everyone talked about, I don't know whether you would call it isolation or lockdown or whatever you want to call it these days. I guess I was fortunate. Nothing really changed for me. I was still out coaching. I was still out playing golf. I was still going to work. So apart from being careful and sanitizing my hands and putting more alcohol on the outside of my body than my inside, nothing really changed in that sense. But as a learner, I've done a few things. You can obviously learn a lot. There's a lot of free stuff out there. So I guess the important thing is, everyone sort of wants to know what website or whatever, what's the miracle pill? I don't think there's any miracle pill to start with. But if you're going to get information, you need to look at who's providing the information. Now, there's a lot of really good people out there doing a really good job in throws. There are some fantastic past elite performers, or so I should say elite performers from the past. It's a bit like once an Olympian, you're always an Olympian, you're not an ex-Olympian. So if you identify the right people, there's some fantastic stuff out there. If you want to go into some really in-depth stuff, you get into stuff from people like Bondarchuk and things like this, or you go into some of the really top level periodization, and there's heaps and heaps and heaps of books on that. Speak to Peter Lawler at any stage, he'll give you a whole recommendation on various books. But if you're going to get onto YouTube and look at stuff, make sure you're just looking at the right stuff there. That's really important, because there's a lot of people putting a lot of stuff on YouTube, and it's either useless or it's teaching you the wrong stuff there. But from that perspective, I did there was a virtual conference on from the States back in, might have even been May or something like that. And Mike Barber was involved. He did a presentation on Kelsey Lee's lead up to the World Championships. So there was about 25 hours of that from the States. Fortunately, they recorded it all. It was on Zoom, so they recorded it all, and you could watch it in Australian time, and you didn't have to get up in the middle of the night and watch it. But some fantastic presenters on that, and so I've worked my way through that, taken copious notes, and I'm still working my way through all of that. There's another one without. I'm not on any commission of Hammer Media, HMMR Media, which was put together by a Swiss hammer thrower, but covers all the throws. A lot of information there. There's a sports science magazine, and then there's a heap of podcasts and things on there. And I guess one of the guys that's fantastic, Vern Gambetta. Most people should have hopefully heard of his stuff. He's a contributor on there as well. So I guess that's one of the things when I looked at him contributing on there, I thought that's worthwhile. Just, and there's a base subscription, and then there's a bigger subscription for. So I guess it's a mix of finding stuff that is free and finding stuff that you do have to pay for. And the bottom line in these days is that you get what you pay for as well. So. If you identify the stuff and you think it's going to be pretty good, it's worth spending a few bucks on as well. So that's one of the things, but yeah, or just keep learning. So yeah, I spend a heap of time listening to podcasts and reading books and looking at videos and just learning from wherever I can. And been fortunate lately, we've been doing Zoom meetings like our Javelin group. So Mike Barber and Grant Ward and Deb Strange from New Zealand, and Angus McIntyre from New South Wales, and a few others, and we've got a Dave from UK that I talked to you about as well, from Loughborough. So we've been getting together every 2 or 3 weeks on Zoom and throwing around some ideas as well around Javelin. So that's been really good. But it's building that network as well is really important. I know most of you guys have probably got people out there, and just start building your own networks. And we've got 7 people on here tonight as well. So, that's a starting point as well for people to sort of start contacting people. So,
yeah, look, you've given us some fabulous tips during the session, Brett. Is there a number one tip you would give a coach just starting out? If you were mentoring a coach, what would be the thing you'd say that's that number one tip to them?
They've already fulfilled it if they've got a mentor.
Right. So getting a mentor.
Yeah, getting a good mentor. I think if you listen to any business podcast, that's what they say is, find someone who's good at what you want to do and get advice from them, because you can do 100 hours of reading or probably 1 hour of conversation to get the same result with a mentor. So find someone who's really been successful in what they're doing and ask them some questions. And that's one of the things is I find at at national titles or at state titles, you're always sitting around with all the other throws coaches. And one of my areas of specialty has always been hammer throw, and most of the hammer throw coaches in Queensland will be at state titles, and most of them will come over and go, I've got this athlete, how do you fix this with your athletes and that sort of thing. So and I think the good thing is, I know also very much so in our throws fraternity, I think everyone's willing to really share. So I think that mentoring is the first thing. And then communication is a key in actually getting your message across. You've got to be able to communicate with your athletes, you've got to be able to communicate with other coaches, and then building your knowledge. So if you can coach at whatever knowledge level you're at, you're doing a good job if you can communicate that. And you're not doing anything wrong. Just because you're doing something one way and other people are doing it another way, you're not doing anything wrong if that's the level of your knowledge. It's when you find out that you maybe are doing something and you could be doing it another way and doing it better, and you continue to do what you were doing, then you're doing it wrong. So you've got to work at the level of knowledge that you have, and then you've got to try and improve that knowledge. And there's stuff I did 35 years ago that I go, well, yeah, okay, I was pretty ordinary then, but that 35 years ago I had hammer throwers throwing 40 meters, and now I've got them throwing 70. So I've learned a fair bit in that time. So that's a big thing there. Yeah.
Final question from me, Brett. What's coming up next for you in coaching? What can you see on the horizon?
Uh, I'm really, I guess, being an educator, and I've spent a lot of time with IWF and Athletics Australia and Queensland Athletics on coach education, and obviously I've been an educator for a long time, being a teacher and being in physical education. So I guess that education perspective as well. I'm really pleased. I think one of my successes coming, the program, both the program at school and my own athletes. I was at Ashmore Little A's on it must have been last Thursday. I think I looked across and there was a number of coaches down there actually coaching either the Little A's group or various squads as well. I looked around and I could see 5 people that were either my school students or my athletes who were all out coaching. And then I know of at least another 10 or 12 that are coaching as well. So I see that, I guess, as a real success. And probably just the whole thing with like Papua New Guinea and that sort of thing with maybe, and contacts I have on some of the other Pacific islands, just helping to, I guess, if we can make our whole region stronger, we're going to get better results in Australia as well, because we're going to get better competition from those regions. So I'm keen to just drive that PNG thing a little bit as well, and see what we can't get out of that as a result as well. So, and I guess 2022 coming up with the Commonwealth Games, helping them towards that, and just one of the things I learned from the head coach role was I had to listen a lot, get a feel for obviously their whole, what their customs are and that sort of thing, and just the style of people they are. A lot of they're very much like most of the other islands where they work on island time. So if you set a meeting for 9 o'clock, you're probably not going to get started about 9:30. So by week 4, I did get started at 9 o'clock, but you can't just sort of chastise them and get into them because it's just not their culture. So it's just working through that and getting them to realise, I guess, what it takes to if they do really want to go well. So it's probably a big challenge there, and just continuing to develop my squad. I've got a few on the horizon for for World Under-20s if that looks like going ahead next year, which who knows where we're at by then. So it's just a case of ticking that along, and if that doesn't go ahead, it's a case of progressing them into being good senior athletes as well. So making that connection from junior athlete into senior athlete is really important.
Well, Brett, a fantastic session. It has been really great having you on Sunday Coaching School, and we really appreciate all the practical advice that you've given us, and the generosity of your answers and your time in being with us today.
Yep, that's not a problem. Anytime, I'm more than happy to help, Darren, and I've enjoyed obviously working with you with some of your clinics in northern New South Wales, and hopefully we can get everything up and going again in the near future and continue on with the development of athletes.
Thanks for that, Brett.